Welcome to Stageworthy, Canada's theater podcast. I'm your host, Phil Rickaby. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you like this episode and hit that subscribe button so that you'll never miss an episode. And also hit that bell icon so that you'll get a notification every time a new episode is released. That way you'll never miss an episode. If you're listening to the audio version, make sure that you are subscribed or following the podcast so that every time I release an episode, it will download to your device, and that way the audio version will never be missed in your podcast feed. My guest this week is Javier Vilalta. Javier is a Mexican-Canadian visual performance creator, stage director, movement coordinator, and translator. He describes himself as an interdisciplinary artist. He resides in Calgary, where he works as a stage director, movement director, and all of the things I mentioned before. We have a great conversation in this episode where we talk about everything from his journey in theater, how a comment from somebody early on could have been very discouraging, but actually spurred him to become a director. We talk about what he loves about Calgary's theater scene. We talk about theater in Canada and so much more. Before we get to the episode, I do want to mention my Patreon. I cannot do this show without my patrons. They're the ones who make sure that I'm covering the cost of this show. And in return, patrons get early access to episodes. They get to be part of the discussion. Whenever I'm considering a topic to discuss, I always go to the patrons and let them have some conversation, and we can figure out, am I on the right track? And we can discuss possibilities for conversations later on. And as the Patreon grows, there will be so much more content and so many more perks that I'm able to offer. I would love to have you as a patron. If you enjoy this show, go to patreon.com/stageworthy and hit the subscribe button and become a patron for just $7 Canadian a month. And you'll get access to early episodes and all the rest of the perks. And again, I will be forever grateful that you decided to back this show. And now, here's my conversation with Javier Vilalta. Javier Vilalta, thank you so much for joining me. Let's just jump in and this is our first time meeting, so I'd love to hear how you describe yourself as an artist.
Well, I'm primarily an interdisciplinary creator. And that what that means is that in performance, I bring different disciplines together to fuse them together to create one creation. And that's what I've been doing for mostly the last decade or two. And I'm also recently came back to theater because theater is something that I have done in the past as well. And I also a stage director. So I'm a combination of both.
As far as your performance and artistic life started, where did you begin, and how did you be determined that you were going to be an interdisciplinary artist?
Well, my goal always was to be in theater. But I went to the University of Calgary, and this was back in the day, maybe a couple of decades ago. The opportunities especially for me as an immigrant artist, were very slim. We have one artistic director here in Calgary where I live who said, as an immigrant director, you will never work here. And the words were so strong for me that I said, I need to pivot here. Otherwise, I will never work in the arts again. I took it to heart. So I started looking more into interdisciplinary creation. So I started to look into performances from other countries where they did performances that were nonverbal. So anything that was created was just image based. And I slowly started working towards that. So that's really how I got there.
That's quite a harsh statement to say to somebody. And that would be very discouraging. And in some ways, I'll bet. Do you think that things have changed much in has there been enough of a change in that scene to sort of undercut what you were told back in that conversation?
This may sound really bad, but there was an event where the Black Lives Matter started, that created this awareness of people of not only Black people, for Indigenous and people of color, and where the position was in the world overall. But especially in the arts, there was a huge transition of like, we have been ignoring these groups, and this is what is happening now. And I really, when everyone just started looking at that, I was like, maybe it's my time to return to theater now that there's more opportunities for me. Maybe after all this, I can see the positive in what happened in the world and try to go back. And I think that's the switch. That's what motivated. That was the trigger. Um, I feel like that intention is dying, unfortunately. I think we're going back a little bit, but because I was able to introduce myself in that little narrow window of opportunity, I just continued since then.
There was that moment during that summer of 2020
Mhm.
when so many of the theaters that weren't able to put on the usual work were suddenly talking about the conversations they were having and the changes they were going to make and the black square they were putting on their Instagram and all of those things. Um, and with few exceptions, many of them did not carry through with those promises and those statements. As soon as it became, the wheel of production started going, it was very easy for them to just leave that all behind them. Which is really disappointing. We kind of hope that our theaters will stick with the things that they say. Um, but you said that you sort of like had a moment, and is it because of that moment, because you sort of slid in that period that you've been able to keep working?
I think so, yeah, because I really saw the window of opportunity. Like, let me tell you, before there, there's no such thing as a Hispanic theater director. It's just not known, it's there's film directors that are very well known, three Mexican directors that have almost won the Oscar almost back to back, it's almost like look like those creators were taken very seriously. But in the theater world, that's not a thing. Up to this date, the in Calgary, for example, the biggest companies have never had a Hispanic director ever, and some of them have been for around being around for like 50 plus years. So it's a challenge, but I think that it will be a good legacy to say, I started this, so maybe others can follow. So at this point, I'm not willing to give up that opportunity because I started it. So I'm just gonna try to stick with it. I was able to direct one piece for a company in Calgary called Vertigo Theater that produces only mystery horror plays. And I was, of course, the first Hispanic director for them. But there's still other companies in Alberta in general that never had a Hispanic or Latino director before. And I'm just trying to see if I can um, make myself present and available for that kind of opportunity.
Yeah, somebody always has to be first, right?
Yeah.
Somebody has to open the door for other people.
Right.
I look at the trajectory of somebody like Guillermo del Toro, who doing indie films and sort of like genre films and eventually working up to these huge big budget films. So and he's one of the people that's opened the door for other film uh, Mexican film directors. And somebody has to do that in the theater world, especially out in Alberta. Um, Tell me a little bit about how you first became interested in theater.
I think I was just born with it. It's very strange because nobody in my family has any artistic inclinations whatsoever. But my mom, she really liked taking me to the theater, just maybe as part of gaining some culture, I guess. And I just really learned to love it. And I remember when I was 10 years old, that was my first experience. I directed with my family a version of A Christmas Carol that I wrote, and we presented it before Christmas or after Christmas dinner. And ever since then, I have not stopped. I mean, of course, not professionally, but it's just something that I just carry with me. I guess maybe the experience was introduced to me so early in life that I just right away recognized it as something that just really excited me.
Yeah. And there I mean, I've talked to a lot of people, and there's basically two kinds of people. People who always performed and people who had a moment when they went to the theater and it just that was it for them.
Right.
And there seem to be a lot of in between. There's like always performed and had a moment.
Yeah, but I mean, the first time they told me I went to a theater, I was 4, and they said that I wouldn't move. Like I was just fascinated by it. That people around me were looking at me. That I was just like with my eyes open, just staring at what's happening in front of me. So maybe that was just really, a lot of people have that epiphany when it's later in life, but I think I just had it when I was just 4 years old.
I think one of the reasons why I love seeing children in the theater, and let's be clear, not every play is appropriate for children, but when there's a show for children, it is so important to get the kids in that audience. I had the privilege of watching a child in their first go to see their first show a number of years ago, and it was a Christmas panto, and for them it was so real. They like you didn't move. And when the curtain came down and when the show was over, they were waiting for their friends to come out. They were just like, and it was sort of fascinating to watch somebody awaken to theater. So that's all. It's
Yeah,
an amazing
yeah,
thing.
definitely.
So there was something else that I wanted to ask you about. Um, you mentioned that oh yes. So you had that you were performing. You were like that sort of thing. But at some point, you must have come to the realization that this was something that somebody can do. It's not just playtime, it's something you can do. Do you remember what that was?
It's just the journey is complicated, but I think that what really pushed me to make those decisions to not give up on it, because this is a very tricky career, and I think it's really easy to just give up when opportunities don't come your way. But I had the opportunity to travel from Mexico City to Calgary back in the day, and I didn't have anyone. I mean, English is my second language, and I have nobody. So my only option, if I wanted to quit, was to go back to what I had before, and I just wasn't going to have it. And it was really hard. But I think that that's when I made that decision that I'm like, if you don't make this work, it's just back to square one, and I just refuse to do that. So maybe this is more like an immigrant story than an artist story, but you always have two paths, which is give up or just continue. And in my case, I just said whatever I need to do, I just can never give up. And it was pretty hard, but I think it's just the resilience that really drove me through all the obstacles.
Yeah. Is in some way, I mean, what is the difference between the immigrant story and the artist story when the person who's telling the story is an immigrant? There is like they're one and the same, they're intertwined. Um Now, directing, you wanted to do theater, you wanted to be an actor. Um and somebody made a comment about Mexican or Hispanic actors, and you decided to go into directing. Um what was the path that you took once you decided to become a director? Where did you go? How did you do it?
I think I just something that I always had in me, but I really wanted to be an actor at first. And then I started getting really frustrated with being in place. I started becoming hyper aware of being in a play and the repetition of it and doing the same thing over and over. I thought I was gonna go crazy. And it was on my last year of university, I was in a show that we took to England to this old house called Nepworth, where they also do big concerts. And we did like a play based on some writings that the man who lived there had written. And I remember this is the moment that I said acting was not for me, because it was me and another person on stage, and he said something to me. And I just, instead of replying with my line, I was like thinking in my head, I'm like, what am I doing? What is this man talking to me? It just felt like I wasn't groundhog. It was just not for me. Uh, it was really a very strange moment of realization. And there was this big silence of me just staring at another person while in my head, I was just realizing that I should just stop acting. But just creating worlds in my head was something that was more exciting. Um, uh, and that's why I slowly started transitioning into directing. And the first experiences went so well that I thought that was my calling.
Yeah. Yeah. And not just that, but you co-founded a theater company along with Norma Lewis, o- Ocho Rojo. Did I get
That's
that
right,
right?
which means
Ocho
red eight
Rojo.
in Spanish. Yeah, because we
Yes.
started as eight, and we like the color red, so red eight. And I wanted to call it red eight, but somebody said no, let's do it in Spanish, and that has been a blessing, a curse for both. But the group is the interdisciplinary group that I had since 2005.
What was the impetus? What was what drove you to, along with Norma, to create this company?
I think that what we realized is that we wanted to produce our own work. When you do plays, they're great, but back in the day, even more maybe not than now, it starts to feel that you're doing somebody else's work. You're producing something that somebody else has written, and you put your own spin on it. But um, back in the day, maybe I saw it as, in order for me to be a good theater director, I need to start producing something that is more personal. And that's why we started. And we were very extreme with how we started. The first show that we did was a 8-person all nude poetry show based on the poets of Pablo Neruda. They were nude all the time, and the poets described the human body in different uh, stages of life. And this could have bombed really, really hard. But first, the first time that we did it was at the Edmonton Fringe in 2005, and it was Saturday night, and it was sold out because at Saturday night everyone wants to see a show at the Edmonton Fringe. And I just remember, because I was at the booth, I was doing all the tech stuff, and I remember nobody moved. You could hear a pin drop throughout the whole thing, and there was like a huge ovation at the end. And then at that point, I was like, okay, I think there's something for us here.
It sounds like the kind of show that would just thrive at Fringe. It's got high it's a little high concept. It's got naked, which is also a big draw. Scantily clad or naked is also a big draw at Fringe. And but it sounds like it was lightning in a bottle, perfect for Fringe, especially the Edmonton Fringe.
Yeah, although it's funny because the show, I think that a lot of people came because of the nudity, but there was a classic, really like um, museum-y kind of approach to it. And I feel like people, when they say nudity, they wanted to see like more the sexual aspect of it or the
Sure, yeah.
erotic. And this was a more classic take on it, which I think a lot of people who wanted to see the other part were disappointed. But we also got followers being surprised that the nudity was not uh, uh, put out there just to exploit the performers, but to really showcase the shapes of their bodies in movement.
I just have to say that you get people into your show, however you get people into your show. If if they think they're going to get lewd nudity and they get tasteful artistic museum nudity, you didn't lie.
Nope,
You got them there and they got something out of it.
that's right, and that's exactly what we did, and we continued doing. And then after that is the first show that we took, because within with the group we traveled to 9 countries, and that's the first show that we took internationally. We took it to Prague. Uh, and it just kept going. Like it was like a gift for us because it just kept growing and growing, and people really enjoyed it.
Um no, you sort of you said that this was like the first show that you did and it was kind of like out there and on the edge. What kind of has that continued for the company, or has the performance style or the working style changed from that?
So that one was poetry based, but then after that, after a couple of performances, we just took all any kind of lines or text out of them. So that was the evolution for it. But another big part of the evolution was to, because we decided we could do anything because it was our group. So we might as well, we're not risk it, we're not risk at all. So we started to make performances that were for very, very small audiences, like an audience of 1, perhaps, or an audience of 5. And that's really what started making uh, our productions very specific or unique to how we created, that the audiences were tiny, and what the experience is for such a small audiences uh, against maybe like 100 or 1,000 people watching it with you, what the difference is.
That's certainly a really intimate way to perform. There have been a couple of shows in Toronto and like especially around Fringe for the history of it, where I remember one show was like the audience piled into a car and the basically had three people in the back seat of the car and the scene was in the front seat, that kind of thing. There have been like really small, intimate shows, and that is certainly a choice. Very hard to make money from small audiences, but also a great way to like bring an audience into the most intimate space possible.
And I think also like the now you make money, bring money up in the conversation is that at that point we said, even if we were performing for a bigger audience, the amount of money we're going to make is not going to be substantial. So we might as well just take the business out of our head and just be like, what if we were millionaires and we had everything? What would we create if that wasn't an issue? So these performances that were very intimate were very elaborate. Like you had like one person and six people performing around them with big sets and costumes and masks. It's not like just like this little thing, right? It's like this very elaborate performances for just one person, and what that entails if you take the business part out of it, because we realize that if we get financial support, perhaps with funding, new artistic expressions can be built out of this that is not always having that business part in the front of your head.
I think that the removal of money from the conversation is always, I think artists are often uncomfortable with the discussion of money and finances, or a lot of times they can be. And then removing that from the equation can be very freeing as long as you can, make it happen.
Well, I mean, we had that opportunity, right? Because we were an ad hoc group. We're not even a registered organization. So we really said we can create whatever we wanted. And I think it's really what it has put us, like, has kept us together as a group for many years, is that we don't feel those kind of restrictions. We don't know, we don't do it for the profit, but just to express ourselves creatively. And that, yeah, you're right. It's very, very freeing because the theme about monies can be very pressing, and it represses one part of the creative process in a way that sometimes you get really discouraged about creating because of that aspect.
If you have to concern yourself with, is this show going to make money? You will make different choices
Of course,
than let's just make the best show we can.
but you start feeling them. I feel like in my experience, you start missing the things that weren't there because of budget cuts. Like here is where this was supposed to happen or whatnot because of this. And then I feel like you're just repressing that creative side. And I know that there's always people think that there's always this balance, but I feel like there's a point where you just need to imagine the world without that kind of restriction.
Very difficult to do in our capitalist society. It's very difficult to put that aside.
And yet, we only live once.
That is true. That is true. I'm looking at a list of companies that you've worked with, and it looks to me like you've had the privilege of working with almost every company in Calgary
In one way or another, yeah.
in one way or another. And are there, I mean, obviously you, as much as you want to have worked with them as a director before, but you haven't had the opportunity. If you could choose one of the local theaters to direct in, which one would you choose over the others?
Well, that's a hard question because it's the project itself that would drive the decision. It's not the company itself, because the companies are amazing. Like I've always had really, like, they've been so welcoming and so supportive of me. Every single company, I can tell you the one that I would never work with again. I can tell you every single one has been so supportive. But I think it's the projects that, because I work with very hyper stylized approach to directing, and it
Mm.
has to be the right project for me to be approached with directing.
Sure, sure. Was it ever a difficult choice to decide? you were talking about how you wanted to make your own work, how when as a director you wanted to direct something that you made instead of working with somebody else's words and text. Was that ever something that was difficult for you? Because it can be a daunting and a scary thing to make that choice. There's certainly actors and directors who spend their entire lives working with other, like the scripts that other people make. I think it takes a very certain brave type to break away and do their own work. Was that ever something you were afraid of, or was it just like you had to do it?
I think that the most difficult part is not that I was afraid of, but the most difficult part for any artist is to find what your own voice is. What's unique about your work? If I go see a play, would I know that it's your play that you directed or that anyone directed it, right? So I guess that the most challenging part about that was finding what kind of work was unique to me. And once the work becomes very personal, it's not really hard at all because even if people hate it, you adore it. And it's almost like a kid, you can say that your kid, somebody can call your kid ugly or, or silly, and you will protect that kid because it's yours.
Yeah.
There's a similarity with that. They just belong to you and they're precious. And it's hard to move you from that position.
Yeah. Was it how did you go about finding your voice as a director?
That was, uh, I tried and I failed many times. Well, not that fail. Like, I mean, fail is a huge word, but I did try many approaches that I was like, oh, this isn't for me. Or like one thing that I hate is when start to get condescending with the audience. Like start giving people what I think they want. The director where they're directing, they're like, oh, the audience is gonna lose it here. The audience is gonna cry here. I hate thinking that the audience is just one person. Uh, I feel like that's very condescending. So just something that I started reading, and then I read an artist that said it has to speak to you because if you think of the greatest artists in the world, they didn't paint or create for anyone specific. The word is so personal to them. And once it's personal to you, then that's really what makes it unique. And after that, then I started cluing in. I need to put things that I would like to see, not that I think people would like to see. And I'd always done that. And sometimes people don't like it, but a lot of people do. And it's how you find your audience as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, your audience finds you because you're doing something they want to see. So of course they're going to come and see it. But you didn't bend yourself to create what they wanted to see.
Yeah, there's so much pressure, and I still see it in the theater world that people want their for everyone to like their shows, and I feel like the word "like" is such a basic word. If you're gonna do that, you're gonna do something so basic and so simple that you're never gonna grow very much artistically. You're just giving them like an introduction, the most accessible kind of art that you can give them. But if you want to really go somewhere, you're going to have to be very specific about the way that you create. And that may alienate some and bring some to you. But I feel like that's the real true path of being unique.
Yeah. No, I think there is a pitfall in trying to make something that everybody is going to like, because that is impossible. If you set out to make something that everyone will like, you will fail almost everyone. But when you're making something that's personal,
Yes.
then people resonate with it. They find it in a way that you know they they wouldn't otherwise. I remember hearing a story years ago where the play Fiddler on the Roof was done in many places all over the world, and everywhere it was, even though it's about these Orthodox Jewish characters, everybody would see themselves in it because it's so specific. They could see themselves in the characters in that play, and I think that's an important lesson to just like be specific about what you want to say, and the right audience will find it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, Fiddler on the Roof is like a great example of, who produces a musical that is like, with such big resources about something so specific in history and about this very specific group of people. like that could have been a huge bomb too, if you think about it. But of course,
Yeah,
it's written in such masterful way that you, of course, it's very hard not to connect with something like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now you have translated poetry and
uh-huh.
other works. Um now I had my friend, you know, Richard Bone, who's currently the artistic director at the Calgary Shakespeare Company. Um, he's translated a French play into English, and I know that translating is hard because you can't just be a literal translator because the language is different. The words translate in different ways. There's an artisticness to translation. Um, what drove you to want to translate, and what was that process in becoming a translator of work like?
And yeah, as you say, the word translating, it's I don't know if it's correct because you're really just adapting. You're adapting pieces to a different language. When I was in high school, I hated certain works by a specific, literally masters from the Spanish repertoire, Lorca and Neruda. They imposed those to us so hard that I thought I hated everyone who liked those. And I don't know what happened. Being detached from the culture that I came from made me try to revisit them, and I started looking at them from a different perspective. So um, I started to think that it was going to be very personal. It was something that really called to me. So, for example, the naked poetry was all Neruda translated by me. Um, and adapted in a way that I actually will speak to me personally as well. I would take some snippets from different poems and then put them together to do in performance to make sense in a narrative kind of way. Um, yeah, so that became a passion as well, and I still do it. Now I do it mostly the other way around. I try to find pieces in Spanish that I can translate into English. So um,
Hmm.
and I also, like, at the beginning, I would do pieces in English I would translate to Spanish to send over there. So um, I do back and forth a little bit.
One of the I think the issues with theater in Canada is we have so much space between
So,
all of our theater hubs. So the theater that's done in St. John's, Newfoundland is different from the theater that's done in Montreal, is different from the theater that's done in Toronto, it's different from the theater that's done in Winnipeg, and so on and so on and so on. That we have different scenes, different work, things are different. So as somebody who hasn't been able to see theater in as many places as I would like, I'm always curious about the other places in Canada and their theater scene there. Um, so I'm curious what you love about the theater scene in Calgary.
Well, the theater scene in Calgary is very unique to the point that there's so much potential for growth. It has a lot of resources, more than people think. Like, it's that city is culturally very heavy, but people don't relate Calgary to that. But as somebody who is an artist working in Calgary, I can tell you that the capacity and potential of cultural growth in the city is immense. And I think that's very exciting for any kind of artist to be in that place, as opposed to a place like New York or Toronto where everyone's already there, right? So it's just mostly to find a place to fit in into those environments, where here you can create the environment and you can help shape the cultural identity of the place. So I feel like that's the most exciting part of being here, as opposed to being somewhere else where it's more established, is that in here you can actually give the culture some direction, or put your footprint can be really in the history of how the city's culture and cultural scene is shaped.
That's really fascinating. Because as you say, if you're in a place like Toronto, there's already so many established theaters, so many established artists, so many independent companies, and it's easy to feel lost in a sea of theaters and companies. Um, but in Calgary, uh, uh, it's different. Is and you've mentioned how welcoming the companies have
Mhm.
been there. Um, and do you feel like that's something that's unique to the Calgary scene?
In a very good way, I think is even if it's by accident, that it just happens to be that way. Yes, of course, because it's a tough business. So you need to be at least in a very supportive, positive environment for you to thrive within the arts in general. Um, yeah, and taking the example of Toronto theater or whatnot, sometimes it feels like that's where the exciting work comes from. And everyone wants just to say like, I wish I was in that place where the exciting work is. But for me, it's something like I switch it. I'm like, for me, the exciting thing is to build that same idea somewhere else. Um, to do the work so it can have its own uniqueness and charm as a place where you can see specific stuff. I was directing a show in Whitehorse um a couple of months ago, and I was so surprised because it's tiny. The city is very small, and they have two or three theater companies, but the kind of work that they do is so sophisticated and and so artistic. I was so surprised. I'm like, you have this really tiny place where people can see things that in Calgary they would never think that the play that I was directing would ever be produced, uh, because it was so out there. And yet we have this really forward thinking group of people in a very small place. And I feel like that's so unique to where they are located and the geography and the kind of work that they do, that I feel that that's what we should be more excited of. It's not where things are established, but how you can shape things where you are.
There is so much freedom in terms of building, right? If
Yes.
there's if there's an established theater scene, or theater has been in existence for so long, they're used to doing things in a certain way, and it can be hard to shake that up. Whereas if the theater scene that you're in is in a building situation where there's a lot more freedom there to do work that's different from everything else.
Yeah, and as I said, like I think one thing that I see, and you were talking about what theater in Canada looks like, and there's it's like what makes the theater unique in Canada, and it's so influenced by a theater from the United States or England, and also very conventional pieces. So you start thinking that the theater here is for pure entertainment, like what, and then you go to like Germany or London, and then the pieces are you see pieces that are like plays that are very experimental with like 30 people on stage, and people pay £250 to see it. Whether here nobody is a perception that nobody would actually go see something like that. And I know they have all the artistic, the theater legacy over there, but how do you build something like that from here and keep it going?
I find it so interesting that you're mentioning theater being purely for entertainment. Whereas I have frequently lamented in Toronto that I'm really tired of seeing important plays. I would love to see some plays that didn't try so hard to be important, and maybe were a little bit more on the fun side. Had something to say while in the fun, but also weren't hitting me over the head with a sledgehammer to make a
Right.
point.
Yeah.
It's interesting, and again, I think it speaks to that distance between all of
Mhm.
the places in Canada where we don't get to see what's happening in each place.
Exactly. Yeah. And you mentioned that with Toronto, and I think that's really fair. It is the other end of the balance.
Yeah,
And why do you
yeah.
find something that is just uniquely Canadian? Like, what does that look like? What does a uniquely Canadian play look like? Is it really maybe a mixture of the both? And how much it can keep growing and expanding.
I mean, ultimately, that is the question. What is a Canadian play?
Yeah,
Like, what is a play that is Canadian? I mean, you've written by a Canadian, that's fine, but like, what is a Canadian play? Right now, we could see a play that is a Newfoundland play, an Alberta play, a BC play, an Ontario play, and all of that sort of stuff.
right.
But because everything is so spread out, um, it's hard to like. There is no homogenous idea of what a play is or what theater is, which is kind of exciting.
It is
That
exciting. Yeah,
we can't nail down. Like there are people who've been like, "Oh yes, this is the great Canadian, the great American play." We can't do that here. We're too spread out. It's kind of exciting.
it is. Yeah, and the future. I mean, I don't know if that will be within our lifetime, but what and that's what I so what I say is like what you put into the world right now will shape how things will become in the future in the arts world. That's why it is so important for me to stay here and try to make a bit of a difference.
One of the things you mentioned early in our conversation was that conversation that you had early in your career where somebody essentially said that as a Hispanic actor, there's nothing for you.
Hmm.
Um, and that sort of brings us to a conversation about the diversity in Canadian theater, and what that looks like. Because of course, the perception when a lot of people are thinking about the theater, it's so white. As far as I don't know if that's if you were talking about theater sort of like opening up to more people of color and black people in Alberta, but that was a brief window. What do you see as far as like diversity of Canadian theater?
Well, as you said, it's white centric, but I feel like the roots of it are, and the way that we present, at least in the way that it is presented, in its structure and shape right now, it is based on white practices, right? I think the idea is how we can accommodate that diversity into this already built structure. Um, that it is not a way that, for example, I will hate to think that I can only direct pieces that are related to my background or culture. And I feel like sometimes it's seen that way. That if there's something that is from that culture, that I'm the ideal candidate right away just because of that. But I want to do like I want not to be restricted to do a Shakespeare because of my background, or something like that. Like how can we all live uh in the same plane? A playing field together without imposing the background and just take into consideration that we're artists, that we bring different things without creating stereotypes or cliches about where we're coming from. Because I feel like that starts to become involved. And I see like indigenous pieces as like talking about the indigenous experience, and that's where all they all go. And the same with the Black experience, which is very important to have. But at what point can we all do anything? And
Yeah.
it belongs to everyone.
I think there's so much to be gained for having um, a uh, a Mexican director take the reins of um, Shakespeare's As You Like It, for example, or something
Right.
like
Yeah.
that. And what would the Mexican director's sensibility bring to that play? And let them just like build on that and just like bring their sensibility and what is there as you like it and how
Yeah,
would that look?
exactly.
I think that's something that's so exciting, and I think that we should be embracing that a lot more.
Well, for a vertical theater, that when I was approached to direct the pieces, it was the Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and that's uh that's the most you know British thing you can. I always thought that it was like Ratatouille. It'd be like they go into the kitchen and be like, "Where's the Mexican director directing this?" It was just so meaningful to me that I was given a piece that was not necessarily a cultural match. That it was completely something different from where I come from, and that I can also give it my own spin as an artist, not necessarily as the stereotype that you may see me as. So that was a really meaningful opportunity that I can still create this uh, unique piece around something that is so authentic to a location that I have nothing to do with, and it's not part of my background. Because that mixture really is really interesting, that fusion, and it gives you the possibility to imagine new worlds. Like you say, we Guillermo del Toro is doing Frankenstein next or whatnot. Like, why wouldn't you give that to like a British director, and why do you give this to this man who's obviously not from around there at all? What does he bring that a British direction couldn't?
I mean, it's so interesting because, he's told British ghost stories on film. Like he's burst into a place where he can tell Spanish stories and also English stories.
Hmm.
And I think that kind of freedom is something that can only benefit the storyteller.
Yeah. And the people who are experiencing these can have a new window to understand the stories from a very different perspective. And I think that really enriches your culture. I think. I think a lot of people don't believe that, but I think that it's a really nice way to look at it.
I think that people have been. I think that diversity is a strength, and I think that it will always be a strength, and that it's the thing that makes everyone stronger by like just bringing everybody up rather than like holding a few people down. There's so much more creativity that can happen with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the same time, you need to identify what the stronger points of diverse artists are. Sometimes I see in theater a lot that people are forcing these diversity points just to having somebody included in certain projects, but sometimes the people who are from the diverse backgrounds fail. Uh, they really didn't belong there to begin with. So when we talk about diversity, we need to make sure that first we identify what the strong points of the diverse group that we try to incorporate are, in order for them to thrive in these environments. Otherwise, if you just put them there as a number, they're just never going to fit in.
No, but I think that it is incumbent on the production to make sure that people who are coming in are given what they need to succeed,
Exactly. I agree.
right? You can't just bring somebody in and slot them into.
But they
Uh,
happens. Yeah.
I'm sure it happens all the time.
Yeah.
That's the completely wrong way to work,
It is.
though.
Yeah.
We have to be able to bring people in, find out what they need to succeed, and give it to them. Otherwise, we bring them in, it doesn't work out. Oh well, I guess we won't be doing that again because that just didn't work. And it's really the theater's fault for not really working with the artists.
Yeah. It is really important for the theater to be very educated as to, if you have a diversity program, that you understand that everyone has different strengths, skills, and talents. And just to say, like, out of this cast, we're gonna have to have this amount of people is not the right approach. You have to think of the people before you think about the numbers.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that thinking about a number again, it's like, am I just filling in a spot for just to have to fill my diversity quota?
Yeah. And
But
it's probably the wrong approach.
it is because we should be able to do is to remove the idea of numbers and hire literally the right the right performer for
Right.
the role, regardless. Instead of thinking about, oh, I have to put a black person in this role because otherwise we won't get our diversity points or whatever it
Yes.
is. Like just but again, if that's a policy and you have to follow it, you have to set that person up to succeed. And if they're tokenized, if they're the one person of color in that production, you're already setting them up to fail.
Totally. Yeah.
So we generally have to do better with
Yes.
all of that. I think rehearsal halls are best when we discuss what we need and we are open to giving each person in the rehearsal process what they need to succeed.
Yeah. And also to identify what they bring as well. That's super
Exactly.
important. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Um, Javier, as we are sort of like heading towards the end of our conversation, I'm curious what you're working on now. Is there a project that you've got going on now that you can tell us about?
I just finished one last week, and it was a really cool project. It was a two-hander version of Mary Stuart, uh, and it was written by an Italian playwright, Dacia Maraini. Um, and it was really, really cool experience to work with two really important, talented performers in Calgary, and a very nice group of designers that we created this modernized version of it. So that's what just happened. And next, I'm actually, now that we're talking about Richard and the Shakespeare Company, I'm doing a show with them next season, which is a queer version of Romeo and Juliet.
Oh, fabulous.
Mm-hmm. And that is coming up next season, and I'm really excited about that.
That is super exciting. That is super exciting. Well, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Javier, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you giving me some of your time today, and I look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Thank you. Love your shirt.
Thank you.